Hi everyone, it's Monday, February 9th, 2015, and this is another Playscii dev update. For those just joining us, Playscii is the name of a art, animation, and eventually game creation tool that I'm working on as part of making my first solo independent game project. And it's made possible in part by the generous patronage and financial support of people for my Patreon campaign. So thank you very much, patrons. You're part of the reason that I'm able to keep doing this, and I'm very grateful for that. So there's been a lot of progress since our last dev update here, and I wanted to show some of that off. So one of the cool things, let's just get right into it here, is that there is now a selection tool. So I can drag out a box here, and then I can hit the usual Control X to copy something, and then I've got a floating selection, and I'm using the paste tool. Like, this auto switches you to the paste tool. One of the things that I realized, is starting from the position of the way that copy paste works in a lot of programs, where like Photoshop, and I think Photoshop is probably the most common reference point here, where it just behaves in a certain way, and like when you copy something and select it, I realize that this is fairly nightmare fuel here as I'm slowly mutilating Cursorimo's perfectly lovely face here. One of the things that I realized when I was adding in selection and copy paste and clipboard support for this program is that paste, because there are multiple bits of information bound up in a given ASCII tile here, that it might make more sense to make paste a kind of tool, kind of like the rubber stamp tool in other types of art program. And so, yeah, let's open up another piece of artwork here. This is my Bioshock art piece that's been kind of mutilated and rendered through another character set. Yeah, so I can copy paste, and actually, whoop, and the program crashed because this support is still very new, but whatever. So, but yeah, as you can see, you can now copy paste things, and that's pretty cool. The copy operation is bound to, like, by default, the selection stays up here, and if I switch over to the paint tool or something like that, then everything that I'm doing here stays constrained within that. I can also just say enough with the thing. I can go back to the paste tool at any time, and it's still functioning as a rubber stamp for the last data that I copy pasted. So that's pretty cool. I can also cut, and that leaves behind the background color that I've got here, so I can, just the usual type of copy paste operations. Another thing that I added was I added this rotate tool, which like, you can use it just as a brush here, where it rotates all of the characters that you've got here. Let me find something that, yeah, this pound character here, which obviously that only has one kind of orientation normally, but I can flip it upside down and rotate it. And I got this in relatively easily just because of the way that my whole framework for painting things works. It was very easy to get that up and running, but I realized, and after talking with Mark Wanacott of Cool Tool fame, we were talking about this, and he had a very good point that you really, what's the workflow for being able to put down rotated tiles like this? And that led to me doing this, actually, where I added some controls to the character picker here, where I can say, okay, I'm looking at the normal character set right now, and I've got my right side up A, B, C, 1, 2, and 3, and all that. And then I can click this button here and rotate the entire set. Because really what I'm doing when I'm making this kind of decision here is I'm like, I want to make just like a sideways emoticon face here, I want to make this weird little, oh wait, here we go. Get the brush settings right here. I want to make a sideways colon, and then make a sideways smiley face, and then I've got these rotated characters. Then I can rotate it around, and so really what this is doing is kind of expanding the toolbox of different ASCII characters that I can use here. And then I can also flip it in the Y direction, or in the X direction. So these are all the different kind of character transforms that rotate and just otherwise change the tile within this thing. And there's a lot of power in this, obviously. I can go through and I can use any character that's in the set here. Like, you know, the nature of ASCII art is that a character, you usually end up depending on characteristics of a given character when it's facing a certain way, and this expands that palette significantly. It also takes it more out of the realm of traditional ASCII art, which is very much based on hardware limitations and all that kind of stuff. But I'm already doing this really weird thing where I've got like a 3D accelerated viewport here with multiple layers and stuff, and so I figured I knew from pretty early on that I wanted to be able to rotate characters, because I think it's actually also the game that I'm going to be making art for this with, I think is going to benefit a lot from, it's going to have multi-tile characters. Like, to be clear, you know, if I was making like a NetHack game or something, this @ sign right here would be the player, and they would just be moving around in a traditional kind of ASCII art world. Whereas really, I want to do things like, well, that character is going to be all goofed up here, but anyway, I want to have characters like this that are comprised of multiple tiles and stuff like that. And so if I decide, hey, you know, let's take this, yeah, and then we can turn the greater than, less than bracket sideways, and now this owl's beak is facing down. And that's a whole different, you know, expansion on the character set that is still kind of recognizable as ASCII art. You can kind of look at that and be like, oh yeah, that's a weird thing. And you can, yeah, I can go over to the rotate tool here and give the owl, like, turn the owl's feathers around and have like this kind of weird thing. This isn't a particularly awesome example of that, but it is like a really useful thing. So yeah, so that's cool. Another thing that I think wasn't working at the time that I did my last progress update is PNG Export. So let me jump over to that. Let me jump over to the horribly mutilated mess of Chris Remo's face here. Sorry, this is just, you can see up there, it flashes up a little message. It says this and this exported. And so I added just kind of a message line here that the last bit of console output and then sometimes special output from the tools and stuff like that show up in the top left-ish corner of the view. Basically exactly my reference point, unsurprisingly, was Doom. Like when you pick up a health pickup or something like that, it says picked up a health kit that you really needed or something. That's up in the top left corner. And I realized that having that kind of output up there, you know, so if you're not looking at the terminal window, if you're even running from that, and you don't want to pull open the console here. So yeah, that's cool. So let's jump over to let's jump over to Chris Remo here and look at the generated PNG output. And sure enough, that is exactly what we've got. It's actually rendering to an off-screen render target. So that's kind of weird. Like, this is actually, these pixels are all coming from OpenGL. Like, I'm scaling the viewport properly and then just rendering the art as is with no perspective distortion or anything like that. One of the things that I still definitely want to do is be able to render this with the CRT output here, because like when I post artwork on Twitter, or if you're just if somebody else is making a cool piece of artwork, then you might want to have that CRT filter on it. So either way, you know, you can toggle it off and on with Shift-R in the application, and I want that setting to be respected in the output, in the generated output image. So for instance, if you're making a game that is a traditional 2D sprite sheet based game, you could use the PNG export feature here to get your artwork out into a PNG file. This also works with alpha, so if I erase a bunch of stuff, this is going to, let me select transparent for the background color, so this is actually erasing to the background. And then if I hit export again, cool. Oh yeah, gthumb actually refreshes. So yeah, this is showing the checkerboard transparency background, showing that it is indeed a PNG with transparency, which is cool. So you could have sprites that actually have alpha, so if you wanted a little character running around, stuff like that. So that had been on the roadmap, and I got it working correctly, and there was much rejoicing. So what else do we have here? Another one of the things that I added was I added the text tool. So I can type text, and I can say, and I'm typing sideways here because I have the rotation. I have the selected rotation here is this. So let me set that right ways up and go back to the text tool here. And you can hit enter, and you can type symbols and all that. You can also use the cursor keys to just move around however you want. So we're still supporting that keyboard input workflow. And again, we can just like cut this stuff and move it around and all that kind of stuff. So the program's at a point now where I think I can actually create some artwork with it. So I really want to, like, sometime tomorrow or something, just do a piece of artwork and post it on Twitter like I did a month or so ago with Edsky. Only now I'm using the new program, and it's much cooler and nicer workflow and interface and all that kind of stuff. And it's really fun, and I want to get back into making artwork because pretty soon I'm going to be making artwork for the game. As far as what's left on the roadmap for Playscii itself, there are still some big things. You've noticed that it might be kind of incomprehensible watching me operate in the program right now because I'm using like keyboard shortcuts and this thing. So one of the things that has always been on my roadmap to add are a menu bar along the top. That was in some of my earliest mock-ups, where it's just a traditional menu bar and it's got a file menu and an edit menu and blah, blah, blah. And it provides just functionality that is either a little bit hidden within the normal interface or just completely, like right now I can add a layer. I can say art, current art, add layer, blah, blah, blah. And then I've got an extra layer that I can paint on. However, that kind of stinks because it is not a reasonable expectation for people to use this Quake console type thing to add layers. So that'll be the kind of thing that you can look in the layer menu and then pull it down and say add layer, duplicate layer, delete layer, all that kind of stuff. So that is one piece of the puzzle. I think it should probably only take me, knock on wood, but I think it'll only take me a few days for that. And then after that, there's a more ambitious thing that I still need to do a mock-up for what exactly that's going to look like here. But what that is a timeline along the bottom. So right now, you can actually, like this program, it supports multiple layers, which you can kind of see from the fact that I was able to add another layer and paint on it, and we've got all these layers. But it also supports multiple frames of animation, and you can specify different delays between those frames of animation. So it's at least as capable as your standard like pixel art animation program where you can output animated GIFs or different frames of animation to a sprite sheet. And right now you don't really have much of a good way of visualizing that, and there's a whole thing that comes with an animation workflow that is completely absent in the program right now. So in addition to the menu bar, where you can have things like add frame, duplicate frame, set frame delay, and all that, I want to have this thing along the bottom, and I realize that I'm pretty much just hand-waving here, but it'll probably be a bar along the bottom that has a timeline with thumbnails of each frame of animation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And probably, I guess it needs to scroll or something. And then I realized, like, well, this should probably also be the layer list, because I don't have a Photoshop-style list of the layers in this piece of art right now. And this would be kind of rather than have another pane off to the side that's like, here's the layers and here's the animation frames, I think I can consolidate that. There's actually a program called ASAPwrite. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's a really cool little program. It's like a nice modern cross-platform Windows application and stuff, but it has a kind of native pixely UI, and it's a really good piece of software. It's very much, if I was just making a pixel art game, I would probably consider using something like that. But yeah, and it uses a very similar, like, it has a matrix of tiles and frames of animation and layers. So, and I think at this point I've done sophisticated enough UI stuff with what I'm doing right now that I can pretty easily get a whole framework, a whole window for that. And that, I think, will be toggleable. It'll come up in the bottom part of the screen here, but it'll only ever be one key away, so you can hit it to bring it up and then hit it again to dismiss it. Like if you're not even doing animation, you can just have it out of the picture. Whatever. If you're not doing animation, but you want to do something with layers, it's still the layer browser. So yeah, that is probably the biggest piece of UI that I've still got. And yeah, so I got to do a mock-up of that. I'll show that off. I'll post that on the Twitter account or something like that when that's up. And the other thing I think that's pretty critical for animation support is onion scanning, so that when you're on frame 3, you can see ghost images of frames 4 and even 5 and 3 and 2 or 2 and 1 and whatever. Just because, like, having worked with other animation programs in the past and talking with animators about what kind of things that they need, I think onion skinning support is just like a no-brainer. Yes, let's just do that. So that's what lies ahead, I think, for the next few weeks of work. It is looking even further ahead, I really want to be doing game development work, like actual work on this video game that I am ostensibly writing this tool in order to make. I really want to be starting to get into that sort of work, at least having like game objects independent of editing artwork moving around on screen by the end of this month. That might be an ambitious goal, but I've made pretty good progress so far, so we'll see. There might also be a renderer rewrite in there, and that sounds pretty scary, and I am a little worried about it, but right now the program doesn't really do anything terribly sophisticated with sorting. There's really just like a list of different renderables, and I think that's probably not going to work for having layers with different, like a piece of artwork can have multiple layers. I'm using my hands here as a visual aid, so great. But if a piece of artwork can have multiple layers, and those layers exist at different Z levels, and then you have another object over here, and those things have and it also has layers at different levels, and then the two overlap, then you need some way to sort those. This is just the classic sorting problem. In 2D game engines, it's usually pretty easy because you can just rely on Z. But right now, an entire piece of artwork with all of its layers renders, so I think I'm probably going to have to rejigger the renderer a little bit to adjust for that. I think that's fine. It'll give me some dynamism wins in other respects, so I can like move layers around independently or something like that. It'll also, I think it's also a prerequisite for getting individual layer thumbnails in the layer view matrix that I'm going to have down here. So I think it's all pretty necessary, but at that point we should have a pretty reasonable ability to do like kind of a performance and memory and whatever benchmark and stress test of like, okay, I'm making a game with this. You're controlling a character and you're moving around and there's lots of objects on screen and there's an environment that's comprised of many, many tiles and different layers. And let's see how that performs, and let's throw a lot of objects in there and see how it works. Right now it's running at a good solid 60 frames per second, but this machine is relatively powerful, and that's really different from having all, doing collision detection and all that kind of thing. So that's the kind of stuff that I'm looking to get into next month. And yeah, that's the road ahead. But I think that's all I've got for now. Lots of progress since last time. I'm pretty excited about it. I can actually make artwork with this thing. I'm very pleased about that. So yeah, that's all for now. Next time we do a video, hopefully I'll have some of that stuff that I talked about in there. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining me. It's just me. And yeah, thank you again to Patreon supporters for helping make this possible. I'm grateful every day that people on the internet are giving me money so that I can program this thing that I think is really cool and is a stepping stone to being an independent game developer with a game to sell that will hopefully put some groceries on the table. So anyway, thank you very much. Have a lovely night. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Good night.